Okay, it's almost 10 a.m. here on the East Coast as we record this, which means the markets have been open. I'm reading a post here from Jordan Fabian on X. He's the White House editor for Bloomberg. S&P 500 set to enter bear market after falling 20% from record. Now, obviously, this is amidst the chaos of the Trump tariff announcement last week. The tariffs now are set to, there's all kinds of tariffs that are actually set to go into effect on April 9th. So that's where some of this you may have heard. The calls from Bill Ackman, for example, a 90-day pause are coming in. But before we get into all of that, I just want to pull up a CNBC article so we can parse some of it. It's a great big picture outlook, sort of rundown of what's happening, but I think it's missing a perspective, as is much of the media coverage, sort of frustratingly lacking a perspective just simply about the nature of Donald Trump. It may make you feel better, it may make you feel worse, but I do think it's missing from the conversation. So as a reminder, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe over at undercurrents.tv where you can join our community, get premium access to the show. Have you noticed prices creeping up? I know you've noticed prices creeping up. Groceries, gas, everything's costing more. Tariffs are kicking in, markets are all over the place, and people are wondering, is your retirement built to handle this? Well, that's exactly why we've partnered with Augusta Precious Metals, because when the economy shifts, smart investors look for ways to protect what they've built, and historically gold has done just that, holding its value through inflation, recessions, and even financial crises. A gold IRA lets you own real physical gold inside your retirement account. More investors, especially those with at least $50,000 in retirement savings, are turning to this as a way to hedge against uncertainty. If you're curious about how it works, Augusta Precious Metals put together a free guide that breaks it all down. How gold IRAs work, why they're in demand, and whether they make sense for you. No cost, no catch, just information you can use. Click the link in the description and grab your copy today. Now on to the CNBC article. The headline here is Dow drops 1,200 points, S&P 500 enters bear territory on Trump tariff market collapse. U.S. stocks were slammed for a third day on Monday. It goes on to say the S&P 500 lost 3.5%. If the benchmark closes there, it will bring its losses from its closing record touched in February to 20%, a bear market in Wall Street terms. The Dow Jones Industrial Average tumbled 1,200 points or 3.2%. The NASDAQ Composite reached 3.7%, further into bear territory as investors sold their tech winners to raise cash. Now, this is more from CNBC. They're saying Trump's initial unilateral 10% tariff went into effect Saturday. That was the April 5th. So there's an April 5th for the unilateral 10%, the global 10%, and then there's April 9th. So we're between the two of them right now. Investors, CNBC says, were hoping for news over the weekend that the Trump administration was having successful negotiations with countries to lower the tariff rates, or at the very least was considering delaying the set of so-called reciprocal tariffs due to take effect April 9th. Instead, the president and his key advisors played down the sell-off. This is where things get really interesting, because on the one hand, Donald Trump is projecting that he's absolutely serious about these tariffs. On the other hand, many of his advisors are projecting that this is all about negotiation. As Politico Playbook put it this morning, they say, so which is it? Are we negotiating here or are we not? And Playbook runs down, they say this, inside the White House, there are signs of a, quote, growing split between influential voices. But I think, again, what that's missing is the notion that this split may be entirely intentional, and maybe it's growing publicly, but it's not growing privately. So they walk through some of the Sunday show. They say on CBS yesterday, we saw Tariff Pitbull Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick insisting the tariffs will bring millions of manufacturing jobs to America. Influential White House aide Stephen Miller is all over X talking about American jobs and trade deficits and getting retweets from VP JD Vance. But Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett was on Fox boasting that more than 50 countries are keen to negotiate. Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins was on CNN talking about negotiations too, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has dropped plenty of hints in this direction. And then they get to that point again. Which is it? Are we negotiating here or are we not? Bill Ackman spent the weekend tweeting all kinds of, or posting on X, all kinds of long, almost essays about what's going on from his perspective. So he says the country is 100% behind the president on fixing a global system of tariffs that has disadvantaged the country. So Bill Ackman, by the way, billionaire very friendly to Trump policies, but, not always 100% behind all of this. So he says the president has an opportunity to call a 90-day timeout, negotiate and resolve unfair asymmetric tariff deals, and induce trillions of dollars of new investment in our country. If, on the other hand, on April 9th, we launch economic nuclear war on every country in the world, business investment will grind to a halt. Consumers will close their wallets and pocketbooks, and we will severely damage our reputation with the rest of the world that will take years and potentially decades to rehabilitate. So now he comes to another question. He says, what CEO and what board of directors will be comfortable making large, long-term economic commitments in our country in the middle of an economic nuclear war? Ackman answers his own question and says, I don't know of one who will do so. Now, again, this is very important because from Trump's potential perspective, and we've covered this on the show for the last several weeks, Donald Trump is not tipping, he's actually being like very, what's the right word, mysterious almost about what his ultimate plan for the process here is. We do know one thing. He's not on the same page as Elon Musk, who just, as the markets were opening, basically, or in the last 12 or so hours, was posting a video of Milton Friedman talking about free trade. We know that those two are not on the same page. Elon Musk has hinted at the idea that he hopes this trade war will result in like a free trade zone between the United States and Europe. He wants a 0% rate, and that's his hope out of all of this. Donald Trump is not that guy. Donald Trump has spent decades in the opposite direction, saying that tariff, what did he say once, was the most beautiful word in the English language, but this goes back before his political career. The man believes in tariffs. He is an ideological protectionist, and that's very new for the Republican Party. It's very new for people like Elon Musk, I would argue, to sort of be in proximity in an administration. Some people would point, or in Cass and others would point to how Ronald Reagan was, willing to sort of protect the American auto industry when he felt that he had to, even though he was from a bigger picture, sort of along the lines of those ideological libertarian economic ideas. But all this is to say, Donald Trump is playing this in a very particular way where he's being enigmatic because he thinks the opposite of what Bill Ackman just says here. Where Ackman's saying what CEO and what board of directors will be comfortable making large long-term economic commitments in our country in the middle of an economic nuclear war. He says, from Donald Trump's perspective, and this is, we don't know this 100%. I'm not a mind reader, and I'm not Scott Bessent, maybe the only other person in Trump's orbit who's as close to this decision-making. But Trump seems to be, from all of the public indications, suggesting his strategy is that the uncertainty means you should invest in America. Scott Bessent and Tucker Carlson talked about this in an interview that posted just in the last few days after the tariff announcement. So the Trump strategy is to be as enigmatic as possible, and it's that mystery or that uncertainty that brings the investments back to America. And if Trump himself tips his hat too much and gives too much away, then people don't buy the threat. They call his bluff and they don't invest in the United States. Now, you can disagree with that 100%. That is a very bold strategy. It's playing a lot of games with people's livelihoods, people's investments, with the global economy. You can disagree with it. But what's interesting if we go back to that political playbook thing where they're saying, so which is it? Are we negotiating here or are we not? The response is, why not both, right? I think that this is what's frustrating is it's pretty obvious if you follow Trump closely and aren't completely, I think, drowning in biases about him, and you're welcome to have all of those biases, but if you're still able to say like this man does sometimes have strategies. Doesn't have to be 4D chess like some people will credit him with sometimes, but you're able to kind of read between the lines of Donald Trump, who is used to making business deals, has spent decades making business deals. He openly believes that the government should be making deals in sort of the same strategic approach, with the same strategic approach as a lot of business deals are struck. So if you believe that, and you're able to say this guy isn't just completely deranged, unhinged, insane, but that there may be, in his mind, a method to the madness, that this may be methodical, this may be strategic, then everything you're seeing coming out of this administration, where you have, for example, Kevin Hassett just on Fox News earlier today, talking about how, the president is going to do what the president's going to do when he was asked about whether Trump would potentially, Brian Kilmeade said, would Trump consider a 90-day pause in tariffs? Hassett says, I think the president is going to decide what the president is going to decide. Even if you think there will be some negative effect from the trade side, there's still a small share of GDP. And you had others bragging throughout the weekend that they were negotiating, as Playbook just listed those right there, that they were negotiating. And if we return to the CNBC article, that other countries have been begging to make a deal. This is Howard Lutnick on CBS. He says, the tariffs would not be postponed. Quote, the tariffs are coming. They are definitely going to stay in place for days and weeks. What he doesn't say there is months or years, which I also think is interesting enough. Scott Bessent said on NBC that 50 countries have approached the administration for negotiations, as CNBC paraphrases it, but cautioned, quote, they've been bad actors for a long time, and it's not the kind of thing you can negotiate away in days or weeks. So the days and weeks there comes up again. We're already in week 2. The tariffs go into effect again on Wednesday. So what you're looking at is potentially a couple of weeks of deep uncertainty. Trump and Bessent and Lutnick probably want to see some really big deals that they can boast about. And I'm saying probably because I don't know. And I just want to make it clear, I don't think it's irrational for anybody to be panicking, especially if you are Vietnam or Mexico, or although Mexico and Canada are slightly different because of the USMCA exemptions. Trump wants to get another deal out of all of that. But I don't think it's irrational if you're in Europe or you're, South Korea, Vietnam, to be panicking about what's happening. And I think that's part of the Trump strategy. Again, agree with it or not, I think he genuinely wants to induce panic because that panic is rooted in uncertainty. And he believes uncertainty is the only thing that is going to make these deals work. So again, the answer from Trump's perspective would be, why not both? You can bring jobs back to the United States in some measure. Whether this is going to turn America back into, what it was in the post-war period is a different question. But from his perspective, you can have both of these things can be true at the same time, that you can be trying to reshore, onshore some manufacturing jobs and other things, and just getting a better deal. Right? It doesn't mean that if you relent and give in to rate negotiation, that you're not bringing jobs back into the United States. It means you're getting a better deal that might be bringing some jobs back into the United States and some wealth back into the United States and be raising a certain amount of revenue, which is something we hear the Trump administration talking about a lot. But clearly they're now going for the days and weeks language. You saw it there from 2 of them on Sunday at the same time, 2 Trump advisors on Sunday at the same time. The next thing I want to talk about is this post from Shai Balor, that I saw being circulated. It said, my open letter to President Trump, this is on X. The frustrating part is that I was on board for a reset, Shai says. Truly, I've said it publicly. I've written about it in this very feed. I understood the need for a detox. This is very similar to how Bill Ackman has started his essays. He says, I wanted a rebalancing. I welcomed the idea of a harder, smarter, America First policy that pushed for fair treatment, reciprocal agreements, and a real industrial strategy rooted in technological superiority, national security, and capital formation. That would have been leadership, but that's not what this is, Shai says. What you've rolled out isn't detox, it's whiplash. This isn't strategic decoupling, it's scattershot retaliation dressed up as reform. He says there's no roadmap, no operational playbook, no clear articulation of where this ends or what the metrics of success even are. It's not an attempt to responsibly unwind America's role as the global shock absorber. It's a brute force attempt to disorder the existing system with no viable alternative in place. And again, this perspective is entirely understandable. And he goes on for a very long time in what is essentially an essay here on X about how this is, quote, not the detox that we've needed. He says he believes that Trump, quote, went with chaos and now confidence is shattered, not because the numbers are bad, but because no one knows what the numbers mean anymore. Firstly, Trump and his advisors, Besant would be perhaps one example, would say maybe we never really knew what the numbers meant. But secondly, the entire tension here is that the Trump strategy seems to be he doesn't want anybody to have quote unquote confidence, because that is lacking that. If he put out, for example, if we go back up, to this earlier part of Shai's essay, if he had the quote roadmap that Shai says he wanted in this rollout, understand that, but there's quote no roadmap, no operational playbook, no clear articulation of where this ends or what the metrics of success even are. Trump clearly does not believe that would make for successful negotiations with all of these different countries, 50 of which, according to his advisors, have been trying to cut deals over the weekend. Trump believes, this is my perspective, it's not 100% sure, I'm not the man's psychiatrist, if such a person exists, or if he has a psychiatrist, or if ever has. But if you look at Donald Trump's history, and if you look at the way that they're trying to be coy, that the White House is trying to be coy, and that they are trying to have their cake and eat it too, say both things at once, my entire point is it may be dumb, but it's not entirely irrational. You may disagree with it. You may think it's an insane strategy. But the fact of the matter is, if Donald Trump put out a quote roadmap or an operational playbook, it would undermine the entire strategy that he's pursuing here, which is to shoot confidence. He doesn't want people, he wants their confidence to be shot. He wants uncertainty because he thinks that is what is going to get the United States a better deal. He thinks that is the most important part of this entire negotiation. And so again, some of these perspectives I empathize with, and I think it is perfectly rational if you're the European Union or another of our big trading partners to be panicked, because that's the entire point. So I just wanted to make this argument that both of these things can be true at once, that the panic can be rational, but that also that can be a part of a rational strategy. It may be a strategy that you completely disagree with, but I think the idea that Trump is sending all of these bumbling advisors onto television to, they're all on different pages, that it's just a complete mess. That's the narrative that's frustrating me, because I actually do think they're doing this on purpose. And I think if you put all of the pieces together of what they've been saying over the course of the last couple of weeks, it's very clear that the uncertainty is something that they are sowing. The chaos is something that they are sowing intentionally to get better deals out of different countries. And again, you can say that chaos is not worth it. Like, do a cost-benefit analysis on the chaos and say the cost of that chaos is not going to be worth the benefits of whatever you get in these negotiations. That's, I think, a perfectly reasonable argument. The only point that I wanted to make here is that it's really frustrating for some of these analyses to miss what appears to be the actual strategy when they're arguing against the Trump White House. So again, argue all you want. I think argue against concept of these tariffs, which is an argument many people, including Elon Musk himself, are making. It's something that conservatives have made for a very long time. That's a perfectly fine argument. Arguing that this is incompetence and the sort of fruits of a disorganized, bumbling stable of idiots who surround Trump, I think is very different. I just don't see the evidence for that. To be fair, I've seen the evidence for that in other parts of the administration. Many administrations, as people say, Washington is much more like Veep than it is like West Wing. But I just don't think there's the evidence to support that claim here when you're following closely what all of these different advisors have said. And so I understand why Shai and Bill Ackman, and from an ideological perspective, Elon Musk, disagree with what's happening. I do, though, think we have to fundamentally, and this is the last point I will make, we have to fundamentally grapple with the reality of the strategy, which is that it is intentionally sowing chaos. Chaos is not a sort of unintentional add-on of this protectionist strategy. It is part of the strategy to get better deals that protect American industries out of all of this. And so as we're, in some cases, I think rightfully panicking about what's happening in the markets right now, that days and weeks should be echoing in our heads, because that to me suggests not months and years. The fact that you have many advisors bragging about countries trying to make a deal and then still talking tough about how, maybe they need non-tariff barriers, right? That it's not just about the tariffs. They need to take care of some of their non-tariff barriers. This all suggests to me that it's very much part of a negotiating strategy. Chaos, uncertainty, tension is all part of what they're trying to do. Again, maybe that's crazy. I was just watching Dave Portnoy's live stream on all of this. He's declared it Orange Monday, but Portnoy says he's still buying, and Portnoy says he doesn't. He seems to also be assuming that Trump has something else that he plans to do with all of this. Ackman's call for a 90-day pause is fairly interesting as well. But I think what we're likely to see is that in days and weeks, we will have days and weeks of uncertainty. But then Trump will have more deals like, the Honda Civic factory coming back to Indiana. They're trying to pair all of this with a big corporate tax cut, which could incentivize or making permanent the Trump corporate tax cut of 2017, which could re-incentivize onshoring. They're trying to couple it with that sort of thing. One of the frustrations I understand more than others is that they're not pairing this with some type of robust industrial policy, maybe even more robust than the CHIPS bill that the Biden administration passed. I think that's an interesting argument that I'm eager to see fleshed out as these days and weeks progress. But I think as all of us are, in some cases, rationally panicking and trying to analyze this and understand it, is really worth, I think, parsing these different statements and just keeping in mind that these things aren't mutually exclusive through the lens of the attempted negotiation, right? All of these things could perhaps be true at once, and we don't know that for sure. But I think it's worth factoring all of that in as these arguments are made against the Trump strategy or expectations from the Trump strategy, consequences from the Trump strategy are guessed at or anticipated. It's just, from my perspective, pretty clear that there's something going on that's just not being well covered by the media. So thank you for tuning in. This is enormously thorny and developing literally by the minute. So we appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here with more Undercurrents soon.